Hey everyone, this is my video lesson for the guitar parts of Right Here, Right Now by Jesus Jones. The song starts with drums and samples before the guitar comes in with a simplified version of what will end up being the pattern that gets played for all the verses. It's the intro, and it sounds like this. To start, you're going to be playing a D at the 5th fret of the A string, along with the open D string. And when you do, you're going to want to play them with a palm mute. That's resting the side of the palm of your picking hand on the strings near the bridge. And that will sound like this. And in fact, that's pretty much how it goes, just even eighth notes. Actually, it'll be 7 in a row, and then you'll add in a 16th note like this. And as you're adding in that extra note, you'll also be sliding up the A string to the A flat at the 11th fret. And you may have noticed I've been using my 3rd finger to fret that D on the A string, and here's why that's going to come in handy. Because now, after you slide up, you're going to put your 1st finger down on the E at the 9th fret of the G string. You're not going to sound that note, not yet anyway. For now, you'll just use your 1st finger and the edge of your 3rd finger to mute the other strings. At this point, Mike starts somewhat randomly hitting the now muted G string. And this is going to become a theme with this song, a decided looseness. Especially with your picking, strumming hand, he's not sloppy or careless, but there's a loose groove kind of feel to it all. You're going to keep that same position and 8th note strumming pattern, but now fret the G at the 10th fret of the A string with your 2nd finger. And right before you make that change, you'll notice the most obvious time he hits that G string. And now we get to the money riff of the song. You'll slide your 3rd finger up to the B at the 14th fret, and this is the first note that won't have the palm muting. So it'll be the B at the 14th fret of the A string, an open D, and your 1st finger on the 12th fret of the G string. Then you'll move down 2 frets on the A string with your 2nd finger to the 12th fret, the open D, and then your 1st finger down 1 fret on the G string to the G flat at the 11th fret. Finally, that riff finishes up by playing an open A and an E at the 9th fret of the G string with your 3rd finger. Using your 3rd finger here will set you up to start the pattern over again for the verses with your 1st finger back on the D at the 5th fret of the A string and your 3rd finger 1 octave higher on the D at the 7th fret of the G string. And so that riff again, slowly. And then up to speed. Now, normally this is where I would take a few seconds to describe the tuning for the song, but in this case I actually found it to be a little bit confusing. From what I've been able to see in videos of Jesus Jones playing the song live, I'm almost positive that their guitars are in standard tuning. But if you want to play the song exactly as it was recorded in the studio, then you're going to have to tune your low E string down to a D for what is known as drop D tuning. And to be sure, that low D is definitely in there, but it only gets played a few times in the whole song and only in the guitar solo. So for the lesson, I will be playing a guitar tuned to drop D, but it really won't make any difference for 95% of the song. And don't worry, I will point out the fingering for standard tuning in a couple of situations where it could be different. The verse parts are going to be essentially the same as what I just went over for the intro. The main differences are going to be the fingering for the start of the pattern and the strumming technique. It's going to sound like this. The verse pattern starts with your first finger on the D at the 5th fret on the A string, and your third finger 1 octave higher on the D at the 7th fret of the G string. The open D string in the middle will get hit with the pick, but it'll be muted by the edges of your fingers on your fretting hand. I've notated that with the X on the tab on the screen. The rest of the finger positions are the same as the intro and are also shown in the tab on the screen. A few things to note. When you make that first shift from the 5th, 7th fret up to the 11th, 9th, you'll have to reverse the orientation of your first and third fingers, like this. Also, when Mike played it in the studio, he let the notes on the G string ring out, most of the time. Once again, it's part of that loose feel he has, but if you listen to the record, you should be able to get a sense of how it should sound. And that's going to be played exactly the same for all of the verses, except for a little wrinkle in the second verse, and I'll go over that in the odds and ends section a bit later in the video. The pre-chorus is the easiest part of the song by far. It's just a G chord. That's it. The whole time. It just gets played with a triple strum like this. And it does that 4 times, and that's it. The only trick is that we're in drop D tuning, so you want to make sure that you don't hit that low D. You can see the fingering in the tab on the screen. I just make sure I rest my first finger against that low D string so it doesn't sound. I also have the tab for a normal G chord if you stayed in standard tuning. The chorus is going to be somewhat familiar if you've already learned the verse parts. It even starts off in the same position as the verses do, but the chords come up in a different order and the strumming pattern is quite distinct. It sounds like this. Now, I will admit that the guitar part in the chorus is quite low in the mix. It's really overshadowed by the keyboard parts, most of the time. The best place to hear what's going on is the first iteration of the chorus pattern after the guitar solo. The chorus pattern starts with your first finger on the D at the 5th fret on the A string, and your third finger 1 octave higher on the D at the 7th fret of the G string. The open D string in the middle will get hit with the pick, but it'll be muted by the edges of your fingers on your fretting hand, like this. I've notated that with the X on the tab on the screen. A few things to note. When you make that first shift from the 5th, 7th fret up to the 12th, 11th, you'll have to jump your first finger to the G string, where it'll stay for the rest of the pattern, and then also switch to your second finger on the A string, like this. Also note that the tab on the screen does have all the finger positions, but it doesn't show the strumming patterns. And lastly, as a shorthand, I'm going to refer to the chords by the fret positions on the A string. So like this: 5, 12, 11. The first part of the pattern goes like this. So that's 5 up to 12 for 1 beat and then immediately down to 11. The second part runs right through that 12 chord again and up to 14 like this. It's going to stay here for a bit and add a little color with an A at the 14th fret of the G string. That's going to be a quick on and off with your pinky, like this. And this section finishes up with a couple of strums on the D and G strings before we get back to the chorus version of the Money Riff from the verses. So everything we've covered so far and now back to our favorite riff, which is almost exactly the same as we were playing it before in the verses, But instead of finishing with an open A and E at the 9th fret of the G string, now it's going to finish up with the G at the 10th fret of the A string and the E at the 9th fret of the G string. And so once again, that riff for the choruses, slowly. And then up to speed. All right, so let's start with a run through. The solo, as well as I can play it, sounds like this. So in the song, the solo takes about 18 seconds, but in this video, it's going to take a lot longer than that for me to go through all the parts. First, remember that this is the only place in the song where tuning to drop D is required to play the song exactly as it was recorded. It's also the only part of the song that's going to require a whammy bar, or what I just found out is properly called a vibrato arm. I've divided the solo up into the 8 bars it takes up in the song, and I'll go over each one individually. Finally, since I'm not really a lead player, I have to give special thanks to Jim Glinsky out of Austin, Texas, who helped me with the last few details in the solo. Jim's not only a talented guitarist, but he's also a very skilled luthier. So if you're ever looking for someone trustworthy to work on your guitar, just do a search for Glinsky Customs ATX and you'll be able to get in touch with him. The only other thing I'll mention is that it sounds like the gain or distortion was turned up quite a bit for the solo, which is pretty common. The first bar is sort of just pitched noise. I've been hitting the open D, G, and B strings and dropping their pitch with the vibrato arm for a few beats and releasing the bar back up to normal pitch, like this. It's a little slower on the going down side and a little faster on the coming up side. Nothing I could really count, more of just a feel thing. Especially in the solo, there's a definite looseness to Mike's playing, and that starts right at the beginning of the solo. The next bar is going to start on the A at the 2nd fret of the G string. You can see the whole pattern in the tab on the screen, and played slowly, it sounds like this. Notice that this is one of those occasions where that low D shows up, right at the end of the phrase. And then up to speed. The third bar starts with a couple of muted strums, just to keep everything in time. I've notated those with the X's on the tab. This section sounds like this. I've been playing the start of this part with my 2nd finger on the C at the 13th fret of the B string, and my 3rd finger pre-bending the A at the 14th fret of the G string. The C gets played, and then the pre-bent G string gets released back down to the A, like this. Then it's a couple of double stops on the B and G strings at the 10th and 12th frets, like this. Next, the phrase finishes up with a pull off from the G to the F at the 10th fret of the G string and a D at the 12th fret of the D string, like this. And that whole section up to speed sounds like this. The 4th bar starts on that low D string and goes like this. So that would be a slide from the 5th to the 7th fret, which because of the tuning to drop D is G to A. And this one you could play in standard tuning, and it would be a 3rd to 5th fret on a low E string. This little pattern gets played twice in a row, just that slide and an open D. Then it's another quick timing strum that sounds like it hits the open A and D strings. That goes like this. It ends with a quick run down the D string, starting with a half-step bend at the 6th fret up to an A, then a slide and a pull-off, as you can see in the tab on the screen. That little pattern goes like this. So bar 4 played slowly sounds like this. And then up to speed. Okay, so halfway through now. Bar 5 features some more low Ds and then some strummed double stops at the 10th fret of the D and G strings. That's gonna sound like this. Just a few things to notice here are that the low D gets played twice the first time and once the second time. Also, it sounds like he slides down off the double stops at the end of each time through, like this. And that whole pattern up to speed. The 6th bar also starts with a couple of muted strums, just to keep everything in time. Once again, I've notated those with the X's on the tab. And this section sounds like this. So that starts with my 3rd finger at the C on the 13th fret of the B string, and my 2nd finger at the 12th fret of the G string. The first time is just the slightest of bends on the G string like this. The second time is a full bend like this. And then that bent note gets picked again before coming back down. So those 3 sound like this. And this section winds up with a series of double stops on the 10th and 12th frets between the B, G, and A strings, as you can see in the tab on the screen. So this whole section, played again slowly, sounds like this. And then up to speed. Bar 7 sounds like this. That's just a little 2-note figure on the A string and some strummed double stops at the 12th and 10th frets on the D and G strings. So once again, it sounds like this. And our final section is kind of a slow motion bend that goes like this. So I find it easiest to play with my 3rd finger on the C at the 13th fret of the B string and my 2nd finger right next to it for extra strength and control. That leaves my 1st finger available to sit on the D at the 10th fret of the high E string. The B string is going to bend up a full step over 13 picks and will eventually match up with that D on the high E string. For what it's worth, I find that I count it in my head as 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So once again, slowly, it goes like this. And finally, up to speed like this. And that's the whole solo. A few tricky spots, but if I can do it, you can too. Just keep working a section at a time, and I'm sure you'll get it up to speed in no time. So those are most of the parts of Right Here, Right Now. If you are liking this lesson so far, please take a second to click on the thumbs up button. And if you have another song that you can't find a lesson for, or the lessons that you find don't get it right, please let me know about those in the comments, and I'll try to learn it and make a lesson for you. Finally, if you're finding this lesson valuable, I have a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can leave me a tip. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, now for the last few odds and ends to get all the parts just right. The first of the little variations comes at the end of the first chorus. It doesn't really change what you play, but at the end of the pattern, it just comes to a complete stop, like this. And then there's a little keyboard break before the next variation, which comes right after that in the first half of the second verse. So this time the verse pattern does get cut short, right after he sings, "Blink of an eye," like this. And after the little break, it just picks up at the beginning of the pattern again. Our next odd, or end, comes at the end of the second pre-chorus, right before the solo. You'll just be strumming the G chords like normal, but after the very last time, you'll switch to a first position D chord. And for this one, I just played the D, G, and B strings. Finally, our last one is actually the ending of the song. You'll be playing through the chorus pattern like normal, but as you would go to start the pattern again, you'll just freeze on that D octave at the 5th fret and let that chord ring out. And now, here are some bonus facts about the song. So, this song is really pretty old now. It was written, recorded, and released in 1990, over 30 years ago. The songwriting credit goes to Mike Edwards, the lead singer of Jesus Jones, and he once described the songwriting process as a couple of hours very, very well spent. The concept for the lyrics came from events of the day: perestroika in the Soviet Union, the overthrow of Ceausescu in Romania, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Mike wanted the song to be his own updated but positive Sign of the Times by Prince. And so, inspired by Sign of the Times, the demo contained samples from that song, and the working title was said to be Nelson for Prince Rogers Nelson. And speaking of samples, it's reported that they originally constructed the guitar solo out of lots of Jimi Hendrix samples mashed together. However, after producer Martin Phillips saw how using samples could lead to legal trouble on an earlier project, none of the sampling made it onto the record. It was a big hit here in America. From February to March 1991, it was number 1 for 5 weeks on the Billboard Modern Rock chart, and then in July 1991, it got as high as number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, but was stopped from reaching the top spot by the worldwide juggernaut of Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams. So there you go. Now you know all about the song and how to play it. Thanks for watching, and I hope that helped you out.